very quiet without us saying anything. So you're all ready. Welcome to the Kelly Writers House. I'm Julia Block, and it's my incredible privilege and honor to be introducing Carmen Maria Machado to the Writers House to celebrate the recent release of her new memoir, In the Dream House. I want to make a couple quick announcements. There are copies of the books for sale just outside this room, so please pick one up. After the reading, Carmen has also generously offered to sign at least a few of your books, given time and space laws, and there is also a reception following the reading. I think there's like one seat up here. If some brave person wants to make their way up here, it's over there on the left. I see like a little space on the bench here. So In the Dream House was published late last fall by Grey Wolf, and we have copies available after the reading. I want to say something about the work in the book, and then I want to say something about Carmen's work here. The second section of In the Dream House is called Dream House as Prologue. And it begins with a short discussion of Saidiya Hartman's essay, Venus in Two Acts. And in that essay, Hartman revisits a story she told and didn't tell in her book, Scenes of Subjection. Hartman describes something she calls the violence of the archive. And Carmen Machado draws this idea out of Hartman's into a discussion of evidence, of the memoir as an act of resurrection, of the memoir as a form of reconstructing meaning and memory. Machado's focus in this prologue is on what Hartman says so crucially about writing out of an archive, but the other hugely significant thing about that essay is the way that Hartman, who's a historian, describes her choice to use close narration rather than metahistorical prose. Hartman uses close narration to write a new kind of history, and she forges a style that allows unheard voices to guide the rhythms and images of the text. In an interview, Hartman says, "I observe that narrative may be the only available form of redress. The stories we tell, or the songs we sing, or the wealth of immaterial resources are all that we can count on." And I'm pointing out this aspect of Hartman's text in part because we recently spent about 3 hours discussing that essay in this very room in the Kelly Writers House Fellows Seminar, and Saidiya Hartman's going to be here next Monday. So the like mention in the book just like leapt out to me as I was working on this introduction. I couldn't help but devote some of my remarks to the essay and to Saidiya Hartman, but also because there's something really important here about language. Carmen makes the point that there's no such thing as a complete archive, particularly when it comes to something like the queer past and domestic abuse. And In the Dream House lovingly, disturbingly, vividly engages with that archive, including its gaps and its contradictions. And Hartman reminds us that it's not just about returning to or reconstructing, however successfully or unsuccessfully, an archive. It's about the way in which we do it, about a narrative craft that refuses easy conclusions about an archive, about a story. And what Carmen does so thrillingly in this new memoir is to remind us of the terrible and beautiful capacities of narrative, which is why this is a book that both begins again and again and that shapes an arc around its story, which is why the part of the text I've been mentioning is called a prologue. But we also get a romance novel, a piece of science fiction, a fable, a picaresque, a choose-your-own-adventure. And we get forms that aren't quite genres too, but maybe subgenres or adjacent ones. Dream house as déjà vu, dream house as idiom, dream house as undead, dream house as void. And if you just flip through the pages of the book, you'll see what I mean. The book can't settle. The book can't quite decide. The book is overly generous, almost embarrassingly so in its formal riches. The book is greedy in wanting to fit in all these forms. The book suggests each form is inadequate, so we need them to pile up and accumulate, even as they recede again and again to make way for the next one. And yet the cohesion or coherence or through line is, in fact, Machado's line. I don't actually know a contemporary prose writer who has a line like Carmen's. Image-rich, restless, and alive. And I mean literally the lines in the book as much as I mean the through line of the beautiful story that gets told. So that's the book, and everyone should pick it up if you haven't already. And I want to say briefly that Carmen has taught here at Penn since the spring of 2017 as an artist in residence, and she inaugurated our first ever offering of English 144, speculative fiction. It got a new number when she invented this course, and she's already developed it into a whole suite of courses spanning the possibilities of that broad umbrella of genres. And if there's urgency to the writing, there's urgency to the teaching as well. These are reading-heavy, intensive workshops that ask student writers to really enter the field that they're writing their way into and to consider the ways in which writing that takes formal risks and thematic risks can really actually transform the way that we live in the world. And I also want to say that as a colleague, Carmen is really treasured among us in the program. Her wit and her generosity and her wisdom help make us who we are. Carmen Maria Machado is the author of Her Body and Other Parties, a finalist for the National Book Award, the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship. She's an artist in residence in the creative writing program here at Penn. She lives in Philadelphia with her wife. Please help me welcome Carmen to the Writers' House.
That was so nice, thank you. Can you all hear me? Does this go higher? Does it, wait, yes? Oh, just pulling on it? Okay, great. Excellent. Hi, everybody. There are so many of you here on this lovely rainy night. Well, it's good to see you. I am going to be reading from In the Dream House. I'm going to read for maybe 20, 25 minutes, and then I'm going to take questions. And I love answering questions, so please, if you have any, please ask them. If you don't, think of one, and I am excited to answer them. Julia obviously did a really beautiful introduction to the book. There's not much more to say to prep you, except I'm going to sort of read a series of chapters from sort of scattered throughout. And a part of the memoir is in the second person, so if there's a you voice, that's me. And I think that's it. All right, great. Dream House as exercise in point of view. You were not always just a you. I was whole, a symbiotic relationship between my best and worst parts. And then in one sense of the definition, I was cleaved, a neat lop that took first person, that assured, confident woman, the girl detective, the adventurer, away from the second, who was always anxious and vibrating like a too small breed of dog. I left and then lived, moved to the East Coast, wrote a book, moved in with a beautiful woman, got married, bought a rambling Victorian in Philadelphia, learned things, how to make Manhattans and use starchy pasta water to create sauces and keep succulents alive. But you took a job as a standardized test grader. You drove 7 hours to Indiana every other week for a year. You churned out mostly garbage for the second half of your MFA. You cried in front of many people. You missed readings, parties, the supermoon. You tried to tell your story to people who didn't know how to listen. You made a fool of yourself in more ways than one. I thought you died, but writing this, I'm not sure you did. Dream House as luck of the draw. Part of the problem was, as a weird fat girl, you felt lucky. She did what you'd wished a million others had done, looked past arbitrary markers of social currency and seen your brain and ferocious talent and quick wit and pugnacious approach to assholes. When you first started writing about fatness a long time ago in your live journal, wait, who here? Y'all are pretty young. Was anyone here on LiveJournal? Okay, before Tumblr, there was LiveJournal. I miss it every day of my life. A commenter said to you that you were pretty and smart and charming, but as long as you were Zoftig, you'd never have your choice of lovers. You remember feeling outrage and then processing the reality, the practicality of what he'd said. You were so angry at the world. You wondered when she came along if this was what most people got to experience in their lives, a straight line from want to satisfaction, desire manifested and satisfied in reasonable succession. This had never been the case before. It had always been fraught. How many times had you said, if I just looked a little different, I'd be drowning in love. Now you get to drown without needing to change a single cell. Lucky you. Dreamhouse as Bluebeard. Bluebeard's greatest lie was that there was only one rule. The newest wife could do anything she wanted, anything, as long as she didn't do that single, arbitrary thing, didn't stick that tiny, inconsequential key into that tiny, inconsequential lock. But we all know that was just the beginning, a test. She failed and lived to tell the tale, as I have. But even if she'd passed, even if she'd listened, there'd have been some other request, a little larger, a little stranger, and if she'd kept going, kept allowing herself to be trained like a corset fanatic pinching her waist, smaller and smaller, there'd have been a scene where Bluebeard danced around with the rotting corpses of his past wives clasped in his arms, and the newest wife would have sat there mutely, suppressing growing horror, swallowing the egg of vomit that bobbed behind her breastbone. And then later, another scene in which he did unspeakable things to the bodies, women, they'd once been women, and she just stared dead into the middle distance, seeking a purgatory where she could be forever. Some scholars believe that Bluebeard's Bluebeard is a symbol of his supernatural nature, easier to accept than being brought to heel by a simple man. But isn't that the joke? He can be simple, and she doesn't have to be a man. Because she hadn't blinked at the key and its conditions, hadn't paused when he told her that her footfalls were too heavy for his liking, hadn't protested when he fucked her while she wept, hadn't declined when he suggested that she stop speaking to anyone, hadn't said a word when he left bruises on her arms, hadn't scolded him for speaking to her like she was a dog or a child, hadn't run screaming down the path from the castle into the village, pleading with someone to help. It made logical sense that she sat there and watched him spinning around the body of wife number 4, its decaying head flopping backward on a hinge of flesh. This is how you are toughened, the newest wife reasoned. This is where the tenacity of love is practiced, its tensile strength, its durability. You are being tested, and you are passing the test. Sweet girl, sweet self, look how good you are, look how loyal, look how loved. Dreamhouse as the River Lathe. Later that fall, she asks you to join her at the Harvard-Yale football game. It is a favorite tradition of hers, and she has flown there for the occasion, but has to be back in Indiana earlier than expected. If you drive there, you can bring me back, she says, and so you drive from Iowa to Connecticut to meet her. And so after a day of autumn temperatures and flask sips and people in furs and bottles of champagne rolling around on the ground like Budweiser cans, you sleep hard in an uncomfortable hotel bed. The next afternoon, you prepare to leave. She is a reckless driver. Nothing has changed since that trip to Savannah, and so you get behind the wheel of your car without asking. You pull away from New Haven, alternating between the radio, conversation, and silence. You scoot down through Connecticut and New York. In Pennsylvania, the light drops away early, and rain glosses the pavement. Somewhere in the middle of the endless, hilly length of this state, the one you'd grown up in, she interrupts herself mid-sentence. "Why won't you let me drive?" she asks. Her voice is controlled, measured, like a dog whose tail has gone rigid. Nothing is happening, but something is wrong. "I'm okay driving," you say. "You're tired," she says, "too tired to drive." "I'm not," you say, and you aren't. "You're too tired and you're going to kill us," she says. "You hate me. You want me to die." "I don't hate you," you say. "I don't want you to die." "You hate me," she says, her voice going up half an octave with every syllable. "You're going to kill us and you don't even care, you selfish bitch." You selfish bitch." She begins to pound the dashboard. "You selfish bitch, you selfish bitch, you selfish." You pull off at the next exit and park at a gas station. She throws open the passenger door before the car stops moving and stalks around the parking lot like a teenage boy who is trying to cool down before he punches a wall. You sit in the driver's seat, watching her pace. The urge to cry is present, but far off, like you're high. When she starts walking back toward the car, her eyes fixed on you, you hastily unbuckle your seatbelt and run to the passenger side. You don't want her to leave without you, and you're not sure she won't. Afterward, the drive is framed by wet, dark mountains. You remember going through Pennsylvania around Christmas the year before and seeing 18-wheelers overturned on the side of these same roads, their engine blocks blackened by extinguished fires. And cars, too, on the highway's shoulder, casually burning. She goes 80, 90 miles per hour, and you have to look away from the climbing needle. The shadowy shapes of deer pass in front of you through curtains of rain. I'm gonna die, you think. You pray for a cop to pull you over, watching the side mirror for blue and red lights that never appear. You clutch the door when she accelerates, and when the car whips weightlessly over a hill. Stop that, she says, and goes even faster. Sleep, she commands, but you cannot sleep. Midnight comes. You enter Ohio, a state you've always found very boring to drive across, but now your adrenaline makes your hands tremble in your lap. You drive past dead animals by the dozens, raccoons blasted apart by speeding tires, deer whose muscular, animal bodies are contorted like that of fallen dancers. The rain slows, and then stops, and you enter Indiana. In the final stretch, when she exits the main highway and takes a 2-lane country road south to Bloomington, the car begins to yawn to the left, kissing the double line, surpassing it, and then to the right where the door passes within inches of a metal barrier. When you look over, the back of her skull is touching the headrest, her eyes closed. You bark her name, and the car rights itself. Now you're too tired, you say. You're falling asleep. Please let me do this final stretch. We're almost there. I'm fine, she says. My body is my bitch. I can make it do whatever I want. Please pull over. She curls her lip, but doesn't say anything else, and doesn't stop. Every so often the car swerves. You pass a religious billboard that asks if you know where you'll go after death. In full daylight, this sort of propaganda would make you roll your eyes, but now it tugs on an old childhood fear, and you whimper and then try, too late, to swallow the sound. When you first came to Bloomington, when you helped her find the dream house, it was impossibly bright. It was late spring, and the trees were electric, new-growth neon green. Now the leaves burn in red and orange, and brown ones spiral away from the branches. The season is dying, and you will die too, you are certain, this night. The car pulls into the driveway around 4 a.m. and sits there in silence. You feel you're going to throw up. The leaves drop onto the car's roof, and the wind snatches them away with a papery scrape. Finally, she reaches to unbuckle her seatbelt, but you are watching the lawn. 2 dark shapes are crossing it, like dogs, but not. Coyotes. It would have been a lovely sight at any time, but in contrast to the night's terrors, it is so beautiful your face tingles. Look, you say softly, pointing. She starts, as if you've struck her. Then she sees what you see. You wait for her coo, for her sweetness. Fuck you, she says. She leans toward you and speaks directly into your ear. You say, look, without saying anything else. I think you're fucking out pointing out someone who's going to fucking kill us. It's the middle of the night. What the fuck is wrong with you? She kicks open the car door. The coyotes bolt for the trees. You watch her stomp through the dream house. Her silhouette is thrown up against a series of illuminated windows, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and then all the lights go out. You get out of the car and sit against the side of the house, putting on your winter coat backward like a smock. The coyotes come back after a while, trotting casually across the lawn, deer too, and foxes, all paying you no mind, as if you are part of the scenery, as if you aren't there at all. You could go to bed too. Or you could sit at the table in the kitchen and watch the scene from behind a window pane, but that, you think, would be like putting this night in a museum, removed, too soon forgotten. Sit with this, you think. Do not forget this is happening. Tomorrow you will push this away. But here, remember. Your butt goes numb in the grass. The lawn is a theater of wildlife. Your little car, stalwart as any stallion, sits silent and bright in the driveway, finally cooling down from her long drive. Birds titter early morning Morse code from the trees. A gaggle of drunk students crest the hill at the edge of the golf course and stand there looking at you, perhaps believing you to be a ghost, before shuffling down onto the street. And in the same way the wrist rotates faster when the door latch is about to release, the pre-dawn night speeds up just a little before the day comes. And though it would not be until the next summer solstice that you be free from her, though you would spend the season's precipitous drop into darkness alongside her, on this morning, light seeps into the sky, and you are present with your body and your mind, and you do not forget. In the morning, the woman who made you ill with fear brews a pot of coffee and jokes with you and kisses you and sweetly scratches your scalp like nothing has happened. And as though you'd slept, a new day begins again. Oh, here's a Philadelphia piece. I never read this one. Dream House's apartment in Philadelphia. Many years later, I wrote part of this book in my apartment in West Philadelphia, the one I shared with my wife. Before we moved here, we'd been living in a terrible, dark building nearby. There were mice and cockroaches. We had to lay traps. One morning, I walked out of my bedroom to make coffee and found a mouse sprawled on one of the glue traps, looking like an adventurer half melted by acid in a forbidden temple. It squealed a horrible squeal. I Googled what to do about a mouse in a glue trap and found an article with advice. In my pajamas, I walked outside with the mouse and the trap in a plastic bag, and I stomped on it as hard as I could before tossing it in a dumpster. As for the cockroaches, they made me feel like I was on the verge of madness and transcendence, like GH in Her Passion. At first, I was fastidious, looking for a paper towel to cleanly smash them as they darted around the counter. Then one day they moved into the digital clock in our microwave, and I could see them silhouetted there. Yeah. City life. The nymphs shed their skin against the glow and left part of themselves behind. After that, I developed the sort of detached practicality I had imagined was reserved for professional assassins in movies. Then I killed them with my bare hands. Dream house is pathetic fallacy. She, the woman in the dream house, always buys too much produce. It never makes sense to you how she fills her fridge, every shelf bursting with leafy greens and robust stalks and thick roots and rotund bulbs, the bright, modern lines of the appliance utterly concealed. There is something sensual about it, almost erotic, until everything begins to go bad. Every time you open the fridge, it smells more and more like a garden, dirt, rain, life, and then like a dumpster, and then eventually like death. You mention it once, but then she does that thing where she repeats what you've said a few times, each time getting a little more sarcastic until you apologize, although you never know what you are apologizing for. It is her money, yes, her fridge, and her rot. Dreamhouse as diagnosis. Should you be concerned? You feel sick to your stomach almost constantly. The slightest motion makes you nauseated. There is a burning in your gut, cramping too, acid probably, and hopefully not cancer. You develop a tremor in your limbs, a weird closed-down sensation in your esophagus. You cry for no reason. You can't come, can't look her in the eye, can't bring yourself to go to one more bar. Your back starts to hurt and your feet, and a doctor says to you, direly, that you just need to lose weight. You bawl your eyes out and miss the punchline entirely. The weight you need to lose is 105 pounds and blonde and sitting in the waiting room with an annoyed expression on her face. Dreamhouse as pop single. A year before I was born, the band Till Tuesday, led by Amy Mann, came out with a single, Voices Carry. Who here has heard the song Voices Carry? A lot of you, okay. The breathy, haunting song about an abusive relationship was a top 10 hit in the United States. In the music video, which was in heavy rotation in the early days of MTV, the boyfriend is, for lack of a better word, ridiculous. A meathead in gold chains and a muscle shirt, he delivers his aggressively banal dialogue with the subtlety of an after-school special. Throughout the video, he dismantles Amy piece by piece. At first, he compliments her music and her new hair, punky and platinum with a rat tail. It was the 80s, you guys. It was 85. Later, in a restaurant that looks like it was borrowed from a sitcom set, he removes her elaborate earpiece and replaces it with a more traditional earring before playfully chucking her under the chin. There is a shot of man behind a gauzy curtain, her face pressed into it with desperation, which then cuts to her leaving for band practice. Here he confronts her on the steps of their brownstone. When he grabs her guitar case, she tears out of his grasp. When she returns, he scolds her for her lateness. You know, this little hobby of yours has gone too far. It's very silly. Why can't you do something for me? Why can't you once do something for me? When she speaks for the first time, like what, she asks, tilting her chin upwards in a challenge, he attacks her, pushing her against the stairs and forcibly kissing her. At the end of the video, they were sitting in a theater audience at Carnegie Hall. The boyfriend puts his arm around a now polished man, sitting quietly, strung with pearls, before discovering her intact rat tail and curling his lip in disgust. Man begins to sing, softly at first, and then louder as she tears a stylish fascinator off her head. Then she stands up and she is screaming. She is scream-singing. He said, shut up. He said, shut up. And everyone is turning to look at her. This final scene, Man said in an interview years later, was inspired by Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, when Doris Day's character lets loose a blood-curdling scream during a symphony to foil an assassination. Long after the video came out, in 1999, the song's producer revealed that the initial demo of the song had used female pronouns. In the original version, Man was singing about a woman. The record company was predictably unhappy with such lyrics, he wrote, since it was a very powerful commercial song, and they prefer as many of its components as possible to swim in the acceptable mainstream. I wasn't certain what to think about the pressure to change the gender of the love interest, but eventually thought it didn't matter to the impact of the song itself. Would a quasi-lesbian song have had any effect on the liberation of such homosexuals, then as now several difficult steps behind the gays on a path toward broad social acceptance? I don't think so, but it was hard to judge at the time. If there's nothing social to be gained, he continued, there's little point in risking that people might lose the main plot and be confused with something that's peripheral to them. How many more people are now sympathetic to gay people's issues because they responded to gay artists who didn't obviously fly the flag, but expressed universal human sentiments that appealed to all? We respond to a song's humanity first, and that's what matters. That was in 1999. 27 years later, decades into her solo career, The Pretense was dropped. Man released an album, Charmer, which included the song Labrador. The music video was a shot-for-shot remake of Voices Carry, with the triteness heightened for comedic effect. In the introduction, in which a greasy, boorish director admits that he tricked Man into doing the remake against her will, is genuinely funny. But the song itself is just as sad as Voices Carry, if not more so. The speaker can't help but return to her abusive lover, dog-like, over and over again. I came back for more, Man sings, and you laughed in my face and you rubbed it in, 'cause I'm a Labrador, and I run when the gun drops the dove again. The song opens addressed to someone Man calls Daisy. Despite all of this, the suppressed representation, the hackneyed 80s weirdness of the video, Voices Carry portrays verbal and psychological abuse in a clear and explicable way. The mania of abuse, its wild emotional shifts, its eponymous cycle, is in the very marrow of the music, dampened, minor inflected verses without a clear key, resolving into a shimmering major chorus before locking it back down again. It is not the ironically upbeat prettiness of The Crystals' He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss, produced in 1963 by Phil Spector, who later murdered actress Lana Clarkson for spurning his advances, though that has its own musical metaphor. Both songs, despite the darkness of their subject, are catchy and endlessly singable. And I do endlessly sing them, that is. Every time I reread this chapter while writing this book, Voices Carry was in my head and my voice for days afterward. When working on the final draft, I took a break to stand on a beach in Rio de Janeiro, watching the blue-green waves curl in toward the shore. Around me, people were playing soccer, and dogs were running into the surf, chasing after sticks, and the light was amber soft, and I realized I was singing it. Hush, hush, I sang to no one. Keep it down now. Let's do a couple more. Dreamhouse as mystical pregnancy. Every television show you watched in your 20s included some kind of mystical pregnancy. Every interesting female character needs one, or so showrunners seem to think. Vampires get pregnant with magical mortals. Comatose women give birth to gods. Empathic Starfleet officers to mystic energy. Time-traveling companions discover that they've been flesh avatars for months, and their actual body is somewhere far away and about to give birth. One woman wakes up on her wedding day to discover herself massively pregnant, courtesy of an alien. You are thinking of these symptoms when you begin to experience pregnancy symptoms you are thinking of these episodes when you begin to experience pregnancy symptoms in the dream house. You vomit into the toilet, you feel swollen and out of sorts. The two of you have talked about a child for so long that you abandon all reason and wonder if you could be pregnant. You've had so much sex and the intensity between you is as real as anything. You consider saying to her, I'm sick like I'm pregnant, isn't that weird? But you're terrified of the radical body modification that is pregnancy, the dangers of childbirth, the unforgiving nature of motherhood, and most importantly, what she'll accuse you of, what she'll do afterwards. You drink ginger ale, you lie down for a long time, you forego food for an evening under the pretense of having snacked, which you definitely did not do. You cannot be pregnant, you literally absolutely could not be pregnant under any circumstances. And then here's the footnote. Thomson Motif Index of Folk Literature, Type 511 1.3, Conception from Eating Mango, T511 1.5, Conception from Eating Lemon, T511 2.1, Conception from Eating Mandrake, T511 2.2, Conception from Eating Watercress, T511 3.1, Conception from Eating Peppercorn, T511 3.2, Conception from Eating Spinach, T511 4.1, Conception from Eating a Rose, T511 3.5.2, Conception from swallowing a worm in a drink of water, T511 5.3, Conception from eating a louse, T511 6.1, Conception from eating a woman's heart, T511 6.2, Conception from eating finger bones, T511 7.1, Conception after eating honey given by a lover, T511 8.6, Conception from swallowing a pearl, T5 12.4, Conception from drinking a saint's tears, T5 12.7, Conception from drinking dew, T5 13.1, Conception through another's wish, T5 14, Conception after reciprocal desire for each other, T5 15.1, Impregnation through lustful glance, T5 16, Conception through a dream, T5 17, Conception from moonlight, T5 21.2, Conception from a rainbow, T5 22, Conception from falling rain, T5 23, Conception from bathing, T5 24, Conception from the wind, T5 25, Conception from a falling star, T5 25.2, Impregnation by comet, T5 28, Impregnation by thunder or lightning, T5 32 1.3, Impregnation by leaf of lettuce, that's my favorite, T5 32 1.4, Conception from the smell of a cooked dragon's heart, T5 32 1.4.1, Conception after smelling ground bone dust, T5 32.2, Conception from stepping on an animal, T5 32.3, Conception from fruit thrown against the breast, T5 32.5, Conception from putting on another's girdle, T5 32.1, Conception from the hiss of a cobra, T5 33, Conception from spittle, T5 34, Conception from blood, T5 35, Conception from fire, T5 36, Conception from feathers falling on a woman, T5 39.2, Conception by a cry. You take a pregnancy test anyway, like an idiot. And of course it's negative because you haven't had a penis anywhere near your body in years. You're afraid she'll find the test, and so you put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it out in someone's trash on the street after she's gone to class. All right. Here's the last one. Dream house as natural disaster. I get bad heartburn. It's the Zoloft which takes the edge off my anxiety, but brings along a bunch of awful side effects, like a good friend who can't shed a bad lover. Every so often I take my nightly meds, and within a few minutes feel like a hot poker has been shoved down my esophagus. I chew antacids and walk to the bathroom. Often the pain, or the force of the neutralization, makes me vomit. I become functionally everyone's favorite science fair project. When I bend over the toilet, I think a lot about how my heart is a volcano, like that quote from Khalil Gibran. It's dumb, but it moved me, and I wrote it down on a Post-it note that I stuck on my desk. If your heart is a volcano, how shall you expect flowers to bloom in your hands? It stayed there until a bad day, working on this book, when I suddenly loathed that quote with every ember of my being and crumpled it up and threw it away. Reader, do you remember that ridiculous movie Volcano, the one with Tommy Lee Jones? Have any of you guys seen this movie? Do you remember how they stopped the eruption in the middle of downtown Los Angeles? They diverted it with cement roadblocks and pointed fire hoses at it, and they rerouted the lava to the ocean, and everything was fine. Sweet reader, that is not how lava works. Anyone can tell you that. Here is the truth. I keep waiting for my anger to go dormant, but it won't. I keep waiting for someone to reroute my anger into the ocean, but no one can. My heart is closer to Dante's Peak of Dante's Peak. My anger dissolves grandmas in acid lakes and raises quaint Pacific Northwest towns with ash and asphyxiates jet engines with its grit. Lava keeps leaking down my slopes. You should have listened to the scientist. You should have evacuated earlier. So, Khalil Gibran, I know what he's saying, but even rhetorically, he's making exactly the wrong point. The fact is, people settle near volcanoes because the resulting soil is extraordinary, dense with nutrients from the ash. In this dangerous place, their fruit is sweeter, their crops taller, their flowers more radiant, their yield more bountiful. The truth is, there's no better place to live than in the shadow of a beautiful, furious mountain. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions. And do we have a floating microphone? We do. Okay. So raise your hand real big, and the microphone, we have one right up here, and the microphone will be brought to you.
Hi, I took Professor Chimin Yang's class on monsters, and obviously you came and spoke to us, and it was really interesting. But for that book, you also seem to have an affinity for footnotes. And
Yeah.
I was curious if you could speak to like why they're so interesting to you as like a literary device and what you think they are good for, and yeah.
Happily, yes. So for that class, I had done an introduction to, so there's this wonderful Philadelphia press, Lanternfish Press. They've been putting out a lot of Victorian literature, and they put out a new edition of Carmilla, which is this super, super gay lesbian novel that came out before Dracula. That is the gayest thing I've ever read in my entire life. And I got to write an introduction for it, and there are footnotes in the introduction as well as in the text itself that I edited. And obviously, yes, this book has a lot of footnotes in it as well. I didn't have any in my first book. I love a formal device. Like I really, whenever I see text in any form, the first thought I have is, how can I bend that to my will? It's not normal. I don't know why I think that, but that's what I do. So yeah. And so footnotes are really interesting to me. There's actually this novel that I really love called The Questionable Shape by Bennett Sims, who's this writer I went to Iowa with. And it's this really beautiful sort of, it's like a zombie novel written by like David Foster Wallace and like Nicholson Baker. It's like this really beautiful, super weird, like formally inventive zombie novel. And he talks, and it's about sort of human consciousness and the way that zombies sort of exist in this space of sort of not quite at the level of sort of human consciousness as like a human being. And he's talked to me many times about how, like, you know, he thinks a lot about how the act of like descending into a footnote is like going into the underworld. Like the act of like, and you know, when you're reading a book and there's footnotes, you have to make choices about like, when do you wait to get to the bottom of the page to read it? Do you like mark it with your finger, drop down, go back and continue? What about footnotes take more than one page? Because sometimes they exist, right? And so it's super, super interesting. So anyway, I was really interested in like his discussion of like what it means to look at a footnote. And in this book, some of the footnotes are just informative. Like they're just sort of like quotes or citations and saying like, oh, it's from this, or like they're bits that like didn't quite fit into the main body of the text, but I thought they were really interesting, and I wanted to put them somewhere. Sometimes it was just like sort of a sort of additional thought that, again, like I needed to put it somewhere, but it didn't belong in like sort of the main body. Sometimes it was just like a fun gesture, like the one that I just read you guys, obviously was like a little more fun and sort of weird. So I don't know, I just really enjoy formal devices. I think they can be done really interestingly. I feel like sometimes people get like allergic to them. They're like, oh, it's so like 90s to like have footnotes, and I'm like, no, it's great. I love it. Like I think you should always like fuck with form in that way. And like, oh, sorry, they're all students here. I shouldn't be. Anyway, but like you should be willing to sort of like do whatever you want. And like for me, like the footnote is just like another tool that I have at my disposal that I get to use in the same way that I get to use any kind of genre that I want. So yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Oh, hey. Hi.
So a lot of your stories seem to be kind of rewritings of myths, like the first story in Her Body and Other Parties with the ribbon, and then Bluebeard in this one. I'm wondering where you collect your myths from and what you look for in them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested. Thank you. That's a great question. So I really love fairy tales, myths, urban legends, folk tales. I've always really loved them. I mean, I went to a lot of sleepovers as a child, so I feel like that's where that began. Like, how can you scare somebody with like a story that's being told to you? Like, because a lot of times you're hearing it sort of orally, and so that makes it like really interesting. And it's just whenever I read one that I like, I sort of just like put it in my pocket. So obviously both Bluebeard is a pretty like famous, and there's always been like really famous, like Angela Carter's like very famously rewrote Bluebeard perfectly. I cannot even begin to like approach what she did with The Bloody Chamber, which if you haven't read it, you must. It's so hot and so fucked up. Anyway, Bloody Chamber is it's a great book, but but also I'm really interested in ones that are a little more obscure. So like the Green Ribbon story for the Husband Stitch was one that I just, as a child, really spoke to me. I have this one that I did a rewriting. I did a revision of for the Fairy Tale Review, which is a really, really great magazine. And I did a retelling of this sort of obscure Italian folktale called The Old Woman Who Was Skinned, which is about a woman who, it's very weird. It's like she her lover is the king, but people can't find out. She's an old woman, and then she jumps out of like a window and like gets caught. Her like skin is so flap. It's like very fucked up. And it's like her skin, she gets like caught in the thorns. Then a fairy comes by and is like, "Why are you crying?" And she's like, "Look at me." And she's like, "I'll fix it." And then makes her beautiful and young. And then her sister or like another old woman sees her and then just cuts off her own skin to like imitate. So like then she's just like she has no skin on her. Like it's just like, what the fuck? Like I read that and I was like, what? Well, obviously I have to rewrite this. Like this is so interesting to me. And I feel like sometimes I'll read a story and it'll speak to me in some way. Like it'll speak to me. Or like I just rewrote another fairy tale for this. There's this really great anthology coming out called The Mythic Dream. That's like different writers, like spec writers retelling myths. And I rewrote this story of this like Greek, I can't pronounce his name, but it's this Greek guy who he killed a dryad when attempting to build his house. And so she put a curse on him where he is hungry forever and he ends up eating himself to death. And I was like, yo, it's what I like is like really gnarly, you know, it's like the more gnarly and upsetting, the better. And I feel like sometimes, you just read a story and you feel like there's something else to be told. Like you have this sensation of there's some unexplored avenue, or like that you feel like the things that you've read that have retold that have missed some essential thing. So like a really good example, the Frog Prince, which I actually isn't the real name, but the one where the princess loses her golden ball, the frog gets it for her, and then she promises him he can sleep in her bed and eat at her table, and then she changes her mind, and then she leaves, and then the frog comes to the castle, and the king makes her sleep with the frog and makes her sit with the frog at her table because he's like, you promised. And it's like the rapiest story in like the history of man, because basically it's like you can't change your mind, and like the king will force you to like bring the frog into your bed because you promised. And like when I read that story, like for me, that's what stands out is like that element of it, like not the romance, not the transformation, not the like for me it's that it's like this weird detail of like the fact that the whole story sort of hinges on this like question of consent. So I feel like, you know, for me it's just like I read a story that's really interesting to me and it speaks to me in some way, and then I just follow that line of inquiry wherever it takes me. But I'm always like, and also like whenever like a new book of fairy tales comes out where it's some like new sort of recollected, or there was a really good book that came out like The Turnip Princess recently. It was like all these German fairy tales that had just been discovered. It was like 2 or 3 years ago, and they finally translated them to English and put that. So I immediately like jumped on that book because I was like, I want to see like what weird shit came from Germany that has been like lost for like hundreds of years, you know? Like that seemed really interesting to me. So yeah, I don't know. I just try to read as many as I can. Oh. Maybe back there. Oh, is that? Oh.
Thank you. That was such a lovely reading. And I wanted to ask, you mentioned footnotes and that you have kind of an affinity for playing with form and formal conventions. And I know there are some other formal conventions in this book that have to do with kind of choosing your own adventure and getting almost malevolently lost within the pages of the book itself. And so I was wondering if you could speak to how you use form and genre. I was going to use a phrase that you used earlier, but I think I won't. How you use form and genre to your will to speak to things that you might not otherwise, both in this book or maybe your other stories too.
Yeah. Thank you, Darby. That was a great question. So to me, one of the best effects that can happen when one is reading something is that the process of reading it mimics some emotional state that you're meant to feel or that's happening on the page. So an example that I usually give when I teach is there's this really great story by Alyssa Nutting, who's a novelist, and her first story collection has this story called Porn Star. And there's this like sentence in this story that's really effortless, where the character, who is this young woman, is standing in a room and observing these various sort of men that are around. There's this reality show that she's like the prize, basically the protagonist. And she's sort of she's observing this thing, and the sentence is very long and sort of meandering. And she's like, I noticed this about 5 minutes after I remember that I'm stoned. And that's how the sentence ends. And the thing about the sentence that's so interesting is that the sentence mimics the experience of being stoned. Like the way that the knowledge of what made the sentence so weird comes at the very end of the sentence. And like the process of moving through it feels sort of strange and kind of like you're in a sort of a fog or a daze. And so for me, that effect is really powerful. And I love it when I'm reading a story and I feel like something is happening to me in the process of reading that like mimics some experience that I'm meant to have. And so in this book, the Choose Your Own Adventure in particular was one where I'd had this idea when writing the book that I wanted to create an experience for the reader. I wrote in my notebook, I wrote gaslight the reader ? And like circled it a whole bunch and like underlined it a whole bunch. And I was trying to figure out ways to create an experience in the book that created a kind of unsettling effect in which the book was not necessarily a friend, but the book was a kind of enemy or something that did not have your best interests at heart and would sort of undermine you in various ways. And that's really hard to pull off. Like, I mean, to pull it off in a book-length way is very impressive. I just wanted like one section, and I had all these various ideas. I was like, I could write a section where I say things as if I've already said them, but I haven't, and then I scold. I was trying to think of different ways to like create the effect of feeling like the book is sort of hostile in some way to the reader. And nothing was working because I kept getting worried that people would just think that I didn't know my own book or that I like could have gotten confused or something was out of order or whatever. But then I was thinking about the Choose Your Own Adventure form, which has always been very interesting to me in its various manifestations because it is a form that creates an illusion of choice that does not actually exist, right? And so it's sort of like this trick for those of you who have children or will have children one day. You don't ask a child, do you want to put on your shirt? You say, do you want your blue shirt or your red shirt? Right? Because if you say, do you want to put on your shirt, the child could say no, and then you have like a giant fight on your hands. And if you say, do you want a red shirt or blue shirt, they're like, I'm making a decision. But they're making a decision within a very limited scope of what you, the parent, have like given them, right? And Choose Your Own Adventure is exactly the same thing, where you're not actually giving a given narrative freedom. You can't just like burst through some like unseen, a door that's like on the page, but you're not given an option to go there. Like you just don't have that choice. And so I felt like writing a Choose Your Own Adventure chapter could create that experience. So in this chapter, I sort of steal from, there's this really brilliant novelist, Kevin Brockmeyer, who's like a really beautiful fabulist that I very much admire. And he has a short story called The Human Soul is a Rube Goldberg Device that's also a Choose Your Own Adventure, a very, very long one. And in it, he has a hidden page. So like there's a page you can't get to via the choices. And it's this beautiful page that if you arrive at it, if you find it somehow, it's just this like sort of beautiful, almost like thesis for the story that's like just gorgeously written and like really special, but you only can find it if you're looking and you sort of break the rules of the form. And so that I was like, okay, that's interesting. So there's pages in this chapter where if you go there, the book yells at you and says like, you're not supposed to be here. You've broken the rules. You're not following my directions. It gives you choices and it chastises you for the choices. It tells you that you never would have fucking done this, go back. Like it exists in this like hostile space. And even when you get out, and like a Choose Your Own Adventure novel from like childhood, there's one path out, but even in this case, it's like, that's not actually how it happened, but like, I'll give you this once, as you can get out. And you can get stuck. Like you can choose enough, you can just get stuck in the chapter. And so I think I did I mean, I think so it ended up doing exactly what I wanted to do, and people have told me that's like one of the most harrowing parts of the book, which I'm really glad for, because I think it makes its point. And also, actually, this is funny. I got an email from Chooseco, which is the company that owns Choose Your Own Adventure, because there's a very litigious company that owns that trademark, and yeah. So I had to. So at Netflix, had gotten sued for doing the Bandersnatch episode of Black Mirror because they had said choose your own adventure, not the actual idea of a branch narrative, but like the phrase choose your own adventure is copyrighted or trademarked. So I had to reach out to them and be like, can I do it? And they were like, yes. And I was like, great. And so they gave me permission to do it. But then they reached out to me and said that they were like, we really thought that you used... This is weird because it's like a children's company. It's like a company for children, but they were like, we thought you really effectively used it to convey like the cycles of emotional abuse. Like, we're really happy for you. And I was like, thanks, Chooseco. God, the world is full of... If you told me as a kid, like, this Choose Your Adventure book you're reading, one day these people are going to fucking email you, and I never would have believed you in a million years. So anyway, and that's just an example. That's, like, one example in the book. But, like, yeah, like, I feel like that idea of sort of getting to, like, create an impression where, like, the reader feels as if the book is affecting their mood in some way, or, like, changing their temperature, or ensnaring them or entrapping them, or creating an effect that you want them to feel, as opposed to them just reading. That's kind of what I always want to do, and I feel like one way to do that, one of many, is form and genre. Oh, there's a question up here. Oh, up here, and then I saw one over here. So, yeah, let me do that one and this one, yeah. Wasn't there one over there? Did I make that up? Did I invent that? Oh, sorry, never. Oh, was it you? Oh, you was you. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering if you could speak about queer villains. And I'm asking this question in part because I just read the novel Rebecca, and I know that you refer to Mrs. Danvers in the memoir. So, just...
Yeah.
Not Mrs. That's not I don't ask about Mrs. Danvers, but queer villains
in general.
Yeah,
sure, of course. So I have a whole chapter in here about queer villainy, which I actually wrote for a magazine that requested it, an essay about this film that I love called Stranger by the Lake, which is this French sort of gay psychosexual thriller about a man, this cruising spot in France, where gay men gather, and there is a murder. This man witnesses a guy killing his boyfriend, and then begins a relationship with this man who he has witnessed murder his boyfriend. And it's this very like sexually explicit film. It's very intense, and I was really interested in this sort of the heightened sort of sense of like what does it mean to like be with someone that you know. Like sort of the knowledge of villainy, and sort of the knowledge of badness or wickedness or evil. And then I was thinking a lot about in general villains, because I'm also like a major like Ursula fan. Like I'm really into, and like Disney is like the go-to example of like using queerness, whether it's like sort of foppishness or like sort of like femininity, or like a kind of or like sort of drag queen lingo, or like the sort of constipated man-hating bitches. Like there's like these various sort of shorthands they use for all the villains that is like very, very gay and sort of has been for a very long time. And what does it mean that I love those characters? And I think that like, you can obviously say like that's problematic. It's problematic that the only like queer characters that appear even briefly or as loosely as defined in a Disney movie are all villains, and the way that like we use queerness as a shorthand for villainy in a lot of genres, not just Disney movies. And a lot of like novels and a lot of films and TV shows, and what does that mean? And for me, what was more interesting is like obviously that's homophobic sort of on its face, but I'm more interested in the fact that I love those characters, and I'm very interested in sort of what it means to say like we don't that like so sort of a thesis of the book. One of the theses of the book is this idea that queer people don't deserve rights because they're better than other people, or because they're somehow perfect, or their relationships are flawless, or they're better parents, or whatever. They deserve human rights because they're human beings, and they deserve human rights. But for some reason, we've gotten caught up in this weird net of respectability politics. This is not just true of queer people. This is also true of like trans folks. This is true of like people of color. Like where like you can't. It becomes difficult to talk about problems in your own community because you are fighting for the right to exist in the way you want to and need to. And people confuse, they say like, oh, you need virtue to have earned those things. But only for those people. If you're like a straight white person, like you can be as bad as you want and apologize however you want. It doesn't really matter, and no one's going to question it, and no one's going to challenge that. But for everybody else, you have to kind of prove yourself. And so for me, there's something really like magical about sort of this unbridled queer villainy and the glee in it. Like sort of this, and they're fabulous for obvious reasons, but they're just sort of like, they've survived and they've made it, and they're like, I'm gonna fuck shit up and like fuck your respectability politics, you know? And I feel like that's really empowering and really beautiful and really satisfying. And I feel like writing this book, I kept thinking about how it's like weird because it's like this past version of myself was like so anxious about like who would find out what, and like what like my relatives who were really homophobic would think about the fact that like my first girlfriend who they met abused me and was abusive, and like how that would shape their idea about gay people, even though like that's ridiculous. Like she's one person out of like many people. And so yeah, so I feel like I don't have like a neat answer to that question, but for me it was just really interesting to think about queer villains and yeah, just I don't know. And just saying, like, it's okay. It's not okay to be evil, but like just something about like the pleasure of watching like gay people get to be evil with no consequence. Well, I guess they have consequences, but because the movie has to punish them, you know, that's part of the process of that sort of villainy, right? But they get to kind of be themselves, this unrestrained sort of glee, and I really love that, and I like appreciate it. Like Ursula, in my mind, Ursula's still alive. She's just like fucking shit up under the ocean still to this day. Wait, a question down here, and then yes, I see you in the back. We'll get to you next.
First of all, Ursula Resurrection Memoir.
Oh my God, please, yes.
But also, I'm obsessed with your obsession with mystical pregnancy. I wanted to make. Have you watched Lost?
Regretfully, yes, I have watched Lost.
I was watching Lost until the moment where they revealed one of the plot points of the island is that women are so much, like 200% more likely to get pregnant on the island, but if they get pregnant, they will die. And that was like a plot point on a major network show. So I was just wondering if for you, if there's anything about the like auto pregnancy or like a mystical auto pregnancy that relates to the writing process, or just like your like birthing other things into the world, like creating other resurrections, or I don't know. I just wanted to.
Wait, can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Well, first of all, when you were talking about, I'm obsessed with mystical.
Right.
Love of conception in general. Birth in general, and that really like on that show when it was like, wow, so I can watch like a mainstream media thing that explicitly says we're gonna make these women more pregnant, more mystically, and then
kill them, right? Yeah.
They have to die for that death. So like for you in your art, I see it, or it sounds like it comes up a lot, and I was wondering if it somehow like this, you can get that list of footnotes, like you can get auto pregnant. There's so many things that don't involve phallus, and like, is there? I don't know. I didn't really have a question with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I will happily talk about auto pregnancy. Yeah, I mean, I am really so. There's actually this really great short story. Oh, I'm so loud all of a sudden. Called The New Mother, which I've taught in a couple of my classes, which is a science fiction story that won the Tiptree Award a couple of years ago. That's about a new sexually transmitted disease that evolves, which sterilizes men and makes women become pregnant with their clones, and they just keep giving birth to their own clones until like they stop having babies or until they get sterilized. And it really asks this like really amazing, and it's kind of beautiful because like it was a novella, and then and now the author is working on a novel. The premise of the novel being that like women have sort of like, it's many years in the future of this disease, and now women have just sort of like created these like sort of intentional communities and are just like raising children together who all are their biological clones. and then like stuff happens obviously because it's a novel, but that's just like kind of that's where they end up. That's, you know, and I feel like something really kind of amazing about that. And like I'm a gay woman, like I think a lot about non-traditional, because I mean like there's just no way, like whatever I do, like it's gonna involve like test tubes and shit, right? And so I feel like there's something really interesting about sort of embracing the intentionality of creation. And I think like that section is so funny because it suggests that like these like if you eat a leaf of lettuce, like you could become pregnant, and like and that feels as random to me as like any other kind of getting pregnant, you know. Sorry, I don't know if I have I don't have a cohesive thought about it, but I don't know. So it was very funny. Apparently, someone's laughing real hard in the back. Oh, there was one more. I saw a question that was in the back. Oh yes, there we go.
Hi, I was just wondering how your writing process differed from writing your book, Her Body and Other Parties, and other works of fiction versus writing the memoir and nonfiction.
Thank you. That's a great question. So it was really different. It's about as different as it could possibly be. I love writing fiction. I find it really joyful. Other fiction writers find this enraging to admit to, because I'm like, oh, fiction is easy for me. Like, I just love it. They're like, shut up. I love writing fiction. Like, to me, it's the easiest thing in the world. It fills me with joy. It's like I get to make little dioramas, and then I get to like make little people talk to each other in the dioramas, and it's like amazing. And I guess I just sort of ride my imagination to its furthest reaches and push up against my own boundaries constantly, and it's like really pleasurable. On the other hand, writing nonfiction feels like peeling my skin from my body one strip at a time and knowing I have to get to the end, which is horrible. And I'm a much slower nonfiction writer, because for me, this is why I would have like never. I remember years ago thinking I would do a PhD and then being like I never would have survived a PhD, because like to know what I think takes me like 12 years. Like I think. I can't. I write so slowly when it comes to nonfiction. I'm trying to figure out what I think. And it's really hard. And I know it's up there somewhere. I just got to like make it work. And also I've discovered that I can only write nonfiction about topics that I've already covered in fiction, which is like not useful or helpful to anybody. So it's just like a very slow process for me. It's very like painful. I mean, this book in particular was like very hard to write. Like it was a very emotionally taxing, very painful process. I would not, honestly, if I could go back in time, I would not have done it. I would not do it again. This book would not exist if I could go back in time. And so for me, it was like that process of just trying to like uncover. And like memory is so weird, you know, because like if you're writing fiction and you're writing for something that happened to you, you could sort of like fuck with it. You can be like, oh, I don't quite remember, but it doesn't matter. I'll kind of like weave it together with this, or I'll make something up or whatever. But with nonfiction, you don't have that luxury. And so you're constantly sort of confronted with the capriciousness of memory and the way that the mind jettisons things, like sends things away and brings them back suddenly. And you know, there was this point in writing the memoir where I got really turned upside down, because I realized that there was a chapter. It wasn't incidental to the chapter itself, but there was a chapter where I had written that I was walking in one direction in a house from one place to another. And when I went back through the book, I suddenly realized that I couldn't remember if I was going that way or the other way along this sort of same path. And I got really in my head about it. And I was just, it was bad, because I kept thinking like, why can't I remember? Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the chapter, but like, why am I so stuck on this thing? And it was really hard. And if it was fiction, I wouldn't have had that problem. I would have been like, fuck it, who cares? It doesn't matter, you know? But I couldn't do that. So yeah, so for me, it was really, honestly, anyone who writes more than one piece of nonfiction, I'm like, you're kind of genius, because I don't think I could do it again, honestly. But yeah, it's just a really different process. It's really difficult. And mentally, it's like a very different headspace. It's as different as it could possibly be, honestly. One question up here. Oh, and then, yeah, we'll do these two up here. Oh, and then are we good after that?
Thank you. I noticed that in Her Body, 7 out of 8 stories were first person. And when you come to memoir, which you expect to be first person, it's second person.
Yes.
Is this because of your interest in formal considerations, or is there a deeper impulse?
I think I just like being difficult is the answer. I mean, so it's funny when Her Body came out, I remember a journalist interviewing me and saying, I noticed that most of these stories are in first person. And I was like, are they? Oh, yeah. Yep. Sure. And I don't know why I like to write in first person. It just makes me, I mean, for fiction, it's like I almost automatically revert to it. Actually, it was weird. I just finished up this comic book series that's been coming out from DC, which is not quite it's a script, so it's not quite first or second, but or rather first or third, but there is, because there is narration, but like I'm writing like this character says this character says this. It's like a totally different. And I was like, this feels really different than writing. I mean, it's different because it's a script, but it's also different because it feels like I feel sort of more removed from these characters in this way, which was really interesting. But I like first person. Some writers really hate. I mean, I think I go to it automatically. If I'm not in it, it's for a reason. I mean, so the one story that's not in first person in that book is especially heinous, which is the Law and Order fan fiction that they let me put in that book for reasons I don't fully understand. And that, like, for me, part of the incantation of that story was saying Benson and Stabler, Benson and Stabler, Benson and Stabler, and so it worked best in third. But all the others, I just wanted it to be kind of really, really. I felt very like I wanted to be very deep into these characters' brains, and I just was in first. And then the memoir, so I had actually written the first draft of it, which was all just memoir bits. So it wasn't any like analysis or pop culture stuff. It was just the memoir. I had written it in second. And my editor was like, so you wrote that in second? And I was like, did I? And I was like, oh, great. Whoops. And he was like, well, so he's like, you can do it, but I want you to make sure that you're being purposeful about it, that you're not just doing it because you're so traumatized that you like went automatically into second person. And I was like, that's a super fair note. Like, I'll look at it. And when I went back to it, I tried to put it into first, but it wasn't working. I was reading it out loud. It wasn't hitting my ear right. And then I was thinking about this novel that I really love called We the Animals by Justin Torres, which if you haven't read it, everybody here, you must. It's really beautiful. And that's a book that's told in a plural first voice, which is a we. And then later in the book, there's an act of trauma that like shatters the voice into like, I think it's second and then third and then first or something like that. And so I decided to just do that, to just like shatter the voice, have the first person be like the me that's standing here, the me that like went off and lived my life. And then the you being this like Carmen, who's like 23, 24 and is like on this eternal hamster wheel of pain and just exists there. And like, I can't reach her. I can't talk to her. She's just sort of existing in this space and I get to like talk at her. And that just ended up being what happened and what really worked. What will I do next? I have no idea. So yeah, so I think, I mean, so that's why. So I feel like it's not sort of a general philosophy, it's more like what suits me in the moment. And that's just what suited me for this book. And the last question.
You kind of touched this in the last story around anger and how anger, especially I feel like female anger, can be generative or it can be productive in some ways, but you kind of insist that no, your anger is like the one that destroys, but it can also be a space where fertile things could happen, I guess. But can you touch a little bit more around like anger and how you grapple with this, especially after experiencing trauma?
Yeah, thank you. It's a real softball question to close out the discussion. Sorry. No, it's fine. It's great. It's a great question. It's a really good question. I mean, for me, I feel like the way we talk about anger is so complicated because, yes, obviously we don't want women in particular. Like if you were like a person of color, a woman, like your anger is not valued. Your anger is sort of considered an anomaly. It's considered... or whether it's something that you do, but like it's to be shamed and not respected. And then I think like the other side of that is embrace your anger. And I feel like there's sort of this weird sort of middle space that for me is more useful, which was thinking a lot about how like writing this book was not, it was not purifying or cleansing or helpful. It was very destructive, and it was very difficult. And I think when I got to the end of it, I realized like, oh, I'm not okay. Like, I'm not as okay as I thought I was around this thing. And that's a pretty, like, alarming thing to realize, like, as you're working on a book. You know, it's like a very, very weird thing to think about. And so, and I don't know, I always think about, my dad, my dad used to always be, people would do shit to him and he would just say, like, we always would tell a story about how, like, when I was a kid, my dad, there were these neighbors we had who were really horrible to my parents and kept telling my dad that he didn't belong on that side of Allentown. And what my dad did as sort of his revenge was he had my mother cut his hair on the front porch and he was like shirtless and like blasting salsa music and like drinking red wine and was just like, hey, like to the neighbors, and just kind of fuck with them. And that story is like funny and is sort of the story that they always tell. But I remember being older and being like, why didn't you just punch that man's teeth down his throat for saying that fucked up thing? And he was like, you are always so angry. Why are you so angry? You're so angry. You've been angry your whole life. And I don't really know how to be any other way, you know? And I don't know. It's like writing this book, I'm angry. I don't feel better. I'm enraged. And when I think about not just my abuser, but also like the people who enabled her and people who continue to enable her and like the systems that sort of failed and broke down at every turn and that continue to break down. And when I look, like when I hear stories about like, you know, people who abuse their power in all kinds of ways and get away with it because systems are not designed to help individuals, are designed to maintain their own longevity, you know, and like having this like deep like set of realizations where I was like, oh, the world, it's bad. It's bad and it's not going to get better. And like all you can do is sort of preserve the people around you and you can sort of like try to like improve individual people's lives, but that like the world is this very broken place and that no institution can be trusted and no sort of system, which is, I mean, and not to bring it out to like the government, but like, I just feel like it's all really broken. And I think there was something about, for me, so the anger feels destructive because but also it's like, what else is there to do? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like I'm so angry and like, I don't know what to do about it or where to put it. And you know, so which is not like a very inspirational answer. Like and so, yeah, so I'm like, yeah, Dad, I'm really mad. I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say about that. I'm really weird. It's weird to me that you're not mad. You know, it's weird to me that that you're so jolly about all of this, you know, and I don't know. Anyway, so I think people should be angry. Obviously, if you're so angry, it interferes with your ability to function on a day-to-day basis, then like that's not great. But like, also, you should be really angry. I am. So anyway, on that very cheery note, thank you, everybody. I'm happy to sign books, so come on up, chat with me. Thank you.